Start your day with It's the Business. Here's Phil Dobbie.
Good morning. It's Monday, the 1st of February, 2021. Today, the Redditt rebels, vaccine nationalism, and later on, a parliamentary hearing asked the question, should the stamp duty holiday be extended? We'll talk to property expert Russell Quirk and ask him that very same question.
Yeah, I think the only way to do it is either to taper it. So, Sunak could say, well, look, I'm going to phase this out on a percentage basis over the next few months. Probably the most simple thing to do.
And this morning, we're waking up to a coup in Myanmar. The sad news that Captain Tom is in hospital with COVID. And all flights to New York have been cancelled, not because of fears over COVID, but because of good old-fashioned snow. It's episode 1. Welcome along.
It's the business, making sense of it all with Phil Dobbie.
So this morning, the price of silver has increased 7%. It seems over the weekend, the rebels from Redditt have struck again, now focusing on commodities rather than shares. It's a bit like the Occupy Wall Street movement, only this time they actually have a plan. And if it's to go where the finance markets have left themselves exposed, that's fair enough, isn't it? For many, it is gratifying to see hedge funds being brought down to earth when they've overreached themselves. Here's the original Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort, on Sky News over the weekend.
It's amazing that the average person can now actually get a fair shake since against the hedge funds, because the hedge funds have been beating up the little investor since the beginning of time, pretty much. And while this will be short-lived, and everyone's got to be really, really careful, because it's going to be like catching a falling knife when it unravels. It's shocking and really amazing and gratifying to see a little bit of the pain going on the side of the hedge funds.
I noticed yesterday, by the way, on my Google TV that one of the most watched movies over the last few days, not The Wolf of Wall Street, but The Big Short. I guess because everyone's trying to figure out what all this means and how it all works. Well, look, the hedge funds had shorted stock on GameStop by around 130%. Now, for those not up on what short selling means, we'll explain in simple terms how it all works in just a second. But could this democratization of the finance markets brought about by social media be a good thing? Certainly the regulators see nothing wrong with it. In fact, they have shown in the United States more concern about the fact that when GameStop and other prices started escalating, they put a stop on trades. If you held stock, you could sell it, but you couldn't buy any more to stop the price running away, which sounds a bit like manipulation, doesn't it? On the part of the retail platforms, more than a group of people getting together to try and move stocks up. It's more of a concern when the facilitators stop you doing anything else. And there's no doubt this is a protest movement. You just need to look at some of the posts on Reddit over the last few weeks. For example, on the Wall Street Bets Reddit forum, which is where all this started. Hedge funds. GameStop can't open its doors because of the pandemic. Let's short more than 100% of its stock so the company dies and 15,000 people lose their jobs. Reddit. F you. That's the sort of rhetoric that was there. Sadly, in that case, I'm not sure. It's a shame if that's the way they were thinking, because, of course, shorting stock isn't going to kill the company. It's just going to upset the people who hold stock in that company. So how does this all work? Well, look, here is someone on Twitter explaining it all in great detail.
And from what I understand, there are these people who they have lots of money, and they have hedges around their house.
Not sure this is going to be much help.
They go to the market, but it's like not a real market. It's it's metaphorical, but it's real.
Okay, maybe I should do this. It might be simpler, do you think? So what happens basically is a hedge fund short stock. This is the way it works. They short stock by borrowing shares and then selling it, even though they don't actually own the shares themselves. So say a share is worth 10 quid and they borrow it and then they sell it straight away to get that 10 quid. But of course, they've got to give the share back. So they have to actually buy a share, but they've expected the price has gone down. So say the price has gone down to 7 quid. They buy it back for 7 quid, give the shares back, and they have made £3 in the process because they sold it for 10 and then bought it for 7. But what if the price goes up? Well, the hedge fund still has to buy the share, but rather than buying it for less than they sold it for, they have to pay more than they sold it for. And then in the case of GameStop, the price went up from less than $60 last week to over $300 on Wednesday last week. So concerned that the price might go up even higher, The hedge funds then quickly buy the stock before the situation gets even worse for them. That's what's called a short squeeze. Because everyone is rapidly trying to buy up their short positions before the situation gets worse. And they really got short squeezed last week. Now, this is all really the democratization of the finance markets. A whole bunch of Reddit users on the Wall Street Bets group, of which there are almost 6 million, decided to take on the finance markets. There's nothing wrong with that, is there?
But then there was this online reading club that was like, oh, well, not today. We want hedges too. And so they went into their bank accounts, and then they also went to the market, and they were like, bye.
I don't think she's serious, by the way. I'm Incorrigible is the Twitter handle where I snuffled that from. It's worth following. It's estimated, by the way, that shorting GameStop might have costed hedge funds more than $1 billion so far, and there's another 600 million at least lost shorting Bed Bath & Beyond. So what is to stop Reddit users doing it all again? Well, it looks like they are with silver, except, of course, in the case of on the share markets, they got locked out from buying more stock on the bigger retail trading platforms like Robinhood. So the price could really only go down. So I guess Wall Street wins at the end of the day. But trading on commodities like silver is a little harder than trading in shares because most of us don't have access to commodity exchanges. But I don't think this is going away. Do you? And maybe it will moderate market behavior. What do you think? Phil at itsThe.business for your thoughts. Maybe shorting should be outlawed like it was in 2008 in Australia and Canada and many parts of Europe. This from the, just to remember that marvelous film, this from The Big Short.
The bonds aren't going down. They won't move. It's possible that we are in a completely fraudulent system.
Now, Germany was the poster child almost of how to deal with a pandemic in the early part of last year. Well, not as good as China or Australia or New Zealand, but in June they'd seen less than 9,000 fatalities. And whilst the economy probably shrank by 5% over the year, that's half the expected fall in GDP in the UK. On Friday, German GDP numbers showed that the economy had grown in the last quarter by 0.1%. Now, that's actually growing in a quarter when lots of people saw things going backwards. But that was then. Now, the fatality rate in Germany is nearing 60,000, and the government's just revised its forecast for GDP growth this year from 4.4%, which was their estimate in October, down to 3%. That is quite a big step down, isn't it? So, in Germany so far, 2.5 out of every 100 people have had the vaccine, compared to 13% in England and more than 50% in Israel. So no wonder they are looking for someone to blame. And remember, the EU only approved the AstraZeneca vaccine at the end of last week. The UK approved it in December. And Germany knows this. Germany's Federal Minister of Health, Jens Spahn, admitted mistakes were made when purchasing vaccines, agreeing they ordered too late and too little when asked by the Bild newspaper in a press conference on Friday. But we still saw the EU for a short while invoking Article 16 to try and stop vaccines bottled in Europe. If that's the term, bottled, I'm not sure. Stick them in vials anyway. They stopped them. They wanted to stop them being shipped to Britain over the Irish border. And Article 16 would mean that there would be border checks on the island of Ireland, something that the whole Brexit debate for 4 years was revolving around, trying to stop that happening. Imagine the impact, just 1 month since Brexit came into being, the EU placing a border in Ireland. Well, it certainly got the hardline Brexiteers excited, like Ben Habib, a former MEP for London and chairman of Brexit Watch and CEO of First Property Group. He's not one to waste an opportunity to push his agenda. Bring it on, he said, basically.
I therefore call on the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson to similarly invoke Article 16, something he should have done weeks ago when it first became apparent that that border was causing trouble for Northern Ireland. I call on him to invoke Article 16, get rid of the border down the Irish Sea permanently, put it on the island of Ireland.
Jesus. Look, he's a bit excitable. When we give him the jab, maybe we should inject a bit of Kool-Aid at the same time, perhaps. Look, there is one benefit for Europe from this very slow vaccine rollout, although it is a bit of a constellation prize, I must admit. Since May last year, the euro has been steadily rising in value, which has been pushing up the cost of exports, particularly for Germany with its big manufacturing base. So it's now looking at ways of managing this rise in the euro. The European Central Bank has even been talking talking about lowering interest rates even further into negative territory. But now the euro has cooled down a little with all this bad vaccine news. And last week we did see a slow slide in the euro. So maybe the ECB will hold off for a while longer, at least until Europe gets its act together on vaccines.
It's the business
with Phil Dobbie.
So later on today, Parliament's Petitions Committee is going to debate an extension to the stamp duty holiday for real estate. It's just 2 months to go now on this scheme that Rishi Sunak announced back in July that cuts stamp duty to zero for all properties of $500,000 or less. Now, this petition, which has only got 135,000 signatures, wants it ending in 6 months' time rather than 2 months. The thing about deadlines is there's always going to be people who miss out, aren't there? So should it be extended? And more to the point, was it really thought through in the first place? Let's talk to property expert and PR man Russell Quirk, director of estate agent Keller Williams. He's also the founder, or was the founder, of eMove. And he's a Brexiteer, so we better stay off that topic. But let's talk just real estate, because we'll disagree on that one. Do you think it was a good idea, this idea of a stamp duty? I mean, it seems like when we had the first lockdown, I mean, it did hit the housing market because you couldn't visit homes and, you know, assessors and surveyors couldn't get into property. But that all changed in the middle of the year, isn't it? Isn't it sort of back to normal now? And wasn't it back to normal in the middle of the last year when Rishi Sunak announced the stamp duty holiday? You know, was it needed, in other words?
Yeah, Phil, hi. So look, I think the initiative was the right one at the time. So this was something that Rishi Sunak announced back in June 2020. And yes, there's definitely an argument that the property market, having come out of lockdown as it did after being kind of shelved away for nearly 3 months, actually. So yes, as you say, no viewings, no evaluations, no activity at all. You could move if you were contracted already to have to do so, as in you'd already exchanged contracts on a purchase or sale. But otherwise, it was, the property market was as part of an enforced stall. I think, would the property market have been okay anyway? Yes, probably, because there was a lot of pent-up demand, lots of people kind of making up for lost time. Don't forget, we had 3 years of Brexit anxiety, whereby lots of people had sat on the fence. So, of course, having got that out of the way, there were a lot of people that were getting off that fence and looking to buy or indeed sell. Kind of in a post-Brexit.
And they were, weren't they? Because I'm looking at ONS figures for loans secured on dwellings last year, almost £1.5 trillion. That's 3% up on the year before, so that's more than inflation. And new mortgage commitments, 7% higher. That's, given the circumstances, that looks to me like an industry that's roaring ahead.
But I think Rishi Sunak's motives were not just about shoring up a few estate agents' livelihoods, for sure. I'm sure that we're probably not his absolute favourite people, but what the intention, of course, was to shore up the economy and to ensure that a more buoyant property market would, first of all, soften the decline of the economy as a consequence of what have now been 3 successive lockdowns, but also to help it recover quicker. Even though you could argue that the property market in the UK up until the end of 2020 almost was overheating. I mean, we were seeing monthly property price rises, so value rises of 1 to 1.5% in some months. Unsustainable, of course, you would argue. But I guess when you look back at that and say, we ended up with lots of positive sentiment, people feeling good about the property market, both as buyers wanting to jump onto a moving thing, but also existing homeowners being happy about the increasing equity in their homes. Did it then fuel positive sentiment, more consumer spending, and help prop up an ailing economy? Then yes. So I think overall it's the right thing to do. But the real question, of course, is, yes, what happens, as you said in your introduction, what happens on March the 31st? So as we'll see debated later today, will we see an extension? I'm not sure it will be as simple or as binary as that, because I think for Rishi Sunak to decide just to go through with the curtailing of that stamp duty holiday ends up being an absolute cliff edge. And there will be, it's estimated, anything between 100 and 200,000 transactions that will not meet the deadline and therefore are vulnerable to falling through.
Right. But I mean, I hate to be harsh on this, but so what? You know, if you got into it and you didn't finish it off in the time allowed, you knew what the circumstances were, and you lose out. The deadline's got to be at some point, hasn't it? And you know, and as I'm saying, you know, we're not seeing house prices sliding in any way. My attitude would be, well, you're lucky if you got it. It's over. Don't worry about it. You just, you know, are you actually going to pull out of buying the house? I suspect not.
Yeah, and look, I'd agree that if you decided to buy your home middle of January and you didn't give yourself enough time as a buyer or indeed a seller that would benefit from that purchase, then yes, you'd have very little sympathy. But what we're talking about here is a market where traditionally it's taken around 8 to 10 weeks to get from having an offer accepted on a property to actually exchanging and completing. So that conveyancing process was about 8 to 10 weeks. It's now, in some instances, in some areas where local authority searches are particularly protracted, and on leasehold properties as opposed to freeholds, it's now 6 months. And that I would absolutely contend is not the fault of the buyer or the seller that entered into a transaction, let's say back in September, October. So, understandably expecting thing to go through in time.
So how would you stagger it then? How would you get off that cliff edge? What would you do? If you'd already put in an offer, you can progress with it?
Yeah, I think the only way to do it is either to taper it. So, you know, Sunak could say, well, look, I'm going to phase this out on a percentage basis over the next few months. Probably the most simple thing to do, if the industry, in the conveyancing industry, can be trusted to tell the truth, of course, big question mark, you'd argue, is that anything that is under offer and it is already in the hands of lawyers within, let's say, 3 months of that stamp duty deadline otherwise having ended, if that deal then completes, will get the benefit of the stamp duty holiday. But look, one way or the other, you know, I think Rishi Sunak is stuck between a rock and a hard place because, of course, you know, if he does what you're suggesting, which is to pull the drawbridge up, which is what he said he would do, that's going to annoy a huge tranche of people. If he allows it to continue, then inarguably those that are not in the property market and don't want to be in the property market, you know, the 35% of UK households that rent will say, well, why is my taxpayer pound subsidising the property market for those people that want to buy a property? And there is, of course, a valid argument there.
There absolutely is, isn't there? And look, if it was really effective, if it was really necessary, if it was making house sales happen that wouldn't have otherwise happened, then you'd expect that the moment the drawbridge is pulled up, housing demand will be subdued. I don't think it will. Yes. Do you?
But no, I don't, because I think there will be pent-up demand. Let's not forget the cost of money. I mean, you know, you can. We're back to the days already, you know, having had lots of high loan-to-value mortgage products pulled over the last few months because of the pandemic. We're now back to HSBC, Coventry, and all sorts of lenders re-lending at 90% loan-to-value at kind of circa 3%. You can fix a mortgage with a bigger deposit now at anything around 2%. So the cost of money is ridiculously cheap and potentially, depending on what happens in terms of economic recovery, getting much cheaper. We could even, of course, see negative interest rates, which obviously will have a downward impact on mortgage rates. So there's lots of factors that I think will prop up the property market for sure. But Rishi Sunak, as the Chancellor, that's already thrown, 300 billion or whatever it is at the pandemic, you know, to chuck another 3, 4, 5 billion at it to shore up the property market, he would perhaps contend is small money by comparison.
But it would be better, wouldn't it, to put it at someone who really needs it, maybe. I mean, but, you know, it's so easy to say billions these days, isn't it? Look, there's plenty to talk about. Great to have you on the first show. Look, I want to, next time perhaps we can talk about house prices in cities, which are holding up reasonably well, even though rents have nosedived. How long can that last for? Plenty to talk about, isn't there? Yeah. Good to talk, Russell.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks for having me on, Phil.
Now, you know, there's one area where there's absolutely no concern about the housing market. In fact, quite the opposite about whether the housing market is doing well enough. Perhaps it's doing too well. The value of home loans in Australia in December, figures just out this morning, up 8.7% in December. In a month. Well, we get to see the mortgage lending figures for the UK very soon. I suspect that's not going to be quite as rosy, but maybe not too bad, because we do know this is a K-shaped recovery, particularly in the UK. Those with money are doing okay. Those without a job are in a pretty hopeless situation right now. That's it for today. That's the first edition. I hope you've enjoyed it. Back again tomorrow morning. You can email me, phil@itsthe.business. Tell your friends to go to itsthe.business to catch up with each episode. I'll see you tomorrow morning.
It's the Business with Phil Dobbie. Listen online at itsthe.business or wherever good podcasts are found.